Hi there, thanks so much for joining me for today's tutorial. I'm Erinino and today we're going to be painting this pretty Easter-inspired springtime wreath. I'm going to go through step by step how to create each of the elements and then how to put it all together in the wreath. So if you enjoyed this tutorial and you want to see more like it, please be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell to know when I have new tutorials out. So now let's just jump in and get started. So for today's painting, I am going to use my Baohong Academy cold pressed watercolor paper. It's 140 pound, 100% cotton. I'm using a sheet that's about 9.5 by 9.5. You can just pick any sheet size that you want to do. And I also have just a cutoff here so I can show you how I'm going to paint each of the elements. So I'll put this one aside. I also have my Royal Talons Van Gogh paints in my palette, a jar of water, and a paper towel. Today I have three different size brushes, all Curry's brand, one in a size 10 round, 6, and 2. And you will also need a pencil and an eraser. This is actually kind of optional. I just like to draw out my circle first as a guide for my wreath. If you don't need to do that, then you don't need a pencil or an eraser. So I'll just go through to start and show you the five elements that are going to be used in this wreath. So I have tried a number of different yellows, and I want to make it, yellows are hard. I want to make them light enough and soft enough and pastel-y so they look kind of soft and Eastery, kind of spring and Easter combined. So I've tried a number of yellows and this is what I think I'm going to stick with. If it doesn't turn out to be like I want, then maybe I'll adjust it partway through. So we'll see how it goes. So I'm starting off with Permanent Lemon Yellow. And just to knock down the brightness of it a bit, I'm going to put in the slightest amount of Payne's Gray. I really shouldn't have cleaned my brush before I did that. Oh well. Okay, so that has a tendency to make it a little on the green side because Permanent Yellow is a cool yellow, or my Permanent Lemon Yellow is a cool yellow. So then I want to warm it up a bit by just adding in a little bit of Burnt Sienna, and just a little bit. That's going to be a lot. Actually, not too bad. I'm going to need more. So I'm going to start off with a yellow rose. Now, yellow roses can be hard because it's hard to get that depth in there with a yellow. So I may just do an initial rose and we may have to go back and do a bit of glazing over top of it after. So I'm going to start with my number 6 brush because these aren't going to be huge roses. Okay, so you're just going to do your kind of squiggles and swirls for the center of the rose. Then you're going to do 3 C curves around it. Okay, just like that. 1, 2, 3. Okay, now this yellow may be a little brighter than I wanted. I'll see what it's like when it dries, and I'm just going to dip my brush in my water just to get a lighter wash, and we're going to go around there and do more C curves. Okay, and we're going to start in the middle of the last C curve on this end and the middle of the last C curve on this end. Not quite the middle, but before it ends. Okay. I hope that makes sense. And we'll do another one up here. And another one over here. And you just keep doing this until you kind of get the shape of the rose that you want. I don't want it to be too big. Okay, and I'm also not doing perfectly shaped curves. I like to come out and do a little bit of a point on some of those outer petals. So then I'm going to dry off my brush, go back into that pigment, and just tap a little bit in the middle. just to get it a little deeper so it has some depth to it. I'm going to leave it at that. Hopefully you can see it. Yellow doesn't pick up all that well, but it's going to pop a little more once we get the other elements around it. So that is our rose, and I may go back and glaze that, like I said. Then our other yellow element is just going to be kind of blobby flowers. No flower, no type of flower in particular. And I'm just going to go and just do kind of oval shapes. That might be a little bright. So almost like a bud shape, really. And we're just going to put these down. I probably should have turned my paper. Just like that. Couple more. And I want to keep these wet. So make sure they're still wet, because we're going to go in with some green, which I should have pre-mixed before I did this, really. Oh well, too late now. So for the green, I'm going to use Azo Yellow Medium, okay, which is a bit of a warmy, which is a bit of a warm brownish kind of yellow. And I'm just going to add in a little bit of cobalt blue, because I want this to be a soft, kind of warmish green, olivey green. A little bit. I'm going to clean off my brush. And I'm pretty certain that these flowers aren't so wet anymore, so I'm just going to go in, make sure they're still wet, especially at the base of them. And I could switch to a smaller brush for this, but I'm just going to try my best not to do that. And I'm going to go into the green, and I'm just going to run a stem up the middle just with the tip of my brush, and I'm going to hit that kind of yellow bud on each one, just so the green bleeds in, just like that. So if your brush doesn't have a good tip on it, good point on it, you can switch to a smaller size. And that is all we're doing for the yellow element. So you can see the rose is kind of dried and lost some of its depth. So I think what I will do is take some of that yellow, and I don't want to just go over top of it because it's just going to make it brighter and brighter. So I'm just going to add a smidge of that Payne's Gray to that. So it's kind of a greeny yellow, and a little bit of that burnt sienna. Okay, and I'm just going to go in the middle again, and then in the inside edge of some of those petals. Okay, I'm not putting a lot of pigment down. I just want to give it a little bit of depth, and it's not going to bleed because it's too dry to bleed now, but that's okay because we're just going to blend it out with our brush instead of relying on the bleed. Okay, so this is just giving it that depth that it kind of needs. So I'm going to rinse off my brush, tap it off on my paper towel, and just kind of soften up that little bit of pigment that we just put in. So I'm just softening up that edge so it looks like it's kind of blending out a little better. Okay, and that'll be our rose. So now we're going to move on to the purple elements, and there's two purple elements, and I'm going to use quinacridone purple red, only because I don't have like a nice bluish purple. If I did, I would not have to mix it so much, but I don't. So this is what I have to do. You may have a purple, which would be awesome. And this is just going to be quinacridone purple red with some cobalt blue. And I want a purpley or a bluish purple, not a red purple. Somewhere in the middle, really. Okay, and we're just going to be using light washes of this. It's not going to be this deep. Okay, so I'm going to get some pigment and I'm going to take some of it off by running my brush along the edge of my jar because I just want a little bit of a wash. And this is going to be similar to this, but we're not going to bleed them. And they're going to be a little more flower-like. So I'm just going to do petals just like this. Okay, and we can come back and overlap or do some glazing on these to give them some depth as well. And I'm just going to stick with my number 6 brush because I don't want a lot of pigment down, or a lot of water rather. And I think the first two are a little dark, so I'm just going to pick up some of that pigment. Don't want these too bright. I want this to be a soft wreath, not so bright and vivid. I'm doing in the middle too. So this is just going to be a branch of little made up flowers. They're not really any flower that exists. Maybe it does, I don't know. You might think they kind of look like crocuses maybe, but they're on a stem where a crocus wouldn't be. I may have done a few too many here, but when I get to the wreath, we'll see. It may change. Okay, then we're going to go into that same green. This one could be, for the stems, can be a little darker. So I think what I will do is add a little bit of Payne's Gray to that as well. Okay, and same thing. I'm just going to run my brush up, but I don't want this one to bleed into these. So ideally, I should probably wait a bit, but for the sake of the tutorial, we're not going to wait. And then you're just going to join the stems up to the flowers like we did for the yellow ones. That one bled in a little bit. This green is still very light. If this stem doesn't pop enough when we do the wreath, I can maybe darken the green a little bit. So these are not sopping wet, so I'm going to go in to the purple again, and we are going to do a little bit of glazing, but I'm sticking to this smaller brush still because I don't want a lot of water. And I'm just putting another layer, just with a few strokes on each of those blooms. I know the first ones look a little dark. I'm going to pick some pigment up. Okay, so that's just giving them a little bit of depth. That'll dry a little lighter as well. Okay, so you have that. Then we have some berries, because I love berries for fillers because they can add a lot of contrast and you can just tuck them in anywhere because they're so small. So I'm just going to use purple berries. And I'm going to take some of the water off my brush. And you're just going to do little balls. And I like to leave a highlight on each of them somewhere. And I'm not going back into that pigment because I want some berries to be lighter than others. Okay, so I'm just going to get lighter and lighter as I go along. If they start to get too light, I'll reach back into my pigment. Just like that. Because we do want them to have a little deeper tone than the other purples, because they're going to add a little bit of excuse me, contrast to our wreath. I just don't want them really vivid. Okay, so it's as simple as that. Then I'm going to go in and go back to that green, which I need to mix more of. And I'm going to make it deeper this time for the berries. Okay, and they should be dry too. You don't want these to bleed into the berries, but I'm just not going to wait for the, like I say, for the sake of the video, I'm just going to jump in, and you're just going to connect these all to that stem as well. Okay, so there you have a little sprig of berries. Now for our last element, we're just going to do leaves. So I'm going to use the same green. I might add a little bit more of the cobalt blue. I should just put a bunch of it here. Okay, and I'm still going to use this brush. I'm not going to use anything other than my number 6, apparently. So for this, we're just going to let the brush make the leaves. So I'm just going to tap my brush down. That didn't work. I'm going to have to paint the shape of the leaves. Okay, so for this we're just doing a basic leaf shape. So these are just going to be kind of pointed ovals. Okay, so there's a point on each end. Just going to connect all these little guys. So what I'll do when I do the wreath is I will do one of each element as I put it on the wreath at real time. And then for the rest of the elements, I'll speed it up. Okay, so those are our 5 elements that we're going to be using in our wreath. Okay, so for our wreath, I'm going to draw a circle as best I can. I'm not good at drawing circles. I just like to do kind of roughly the outside points, and then see if once I join those up, if I get a half decent looking circle shape. It may not be centered on the page, but you know, that's okay. We don't have to be so precise with that. So there's our circle shape, and I'm going to lighten that up with my kneaded eraser. Ideally, you want to work light to dark. Okay, so what I want to do is start off with my roses. and see if I can get that same yellow that I had. Hopefully I can. And I'm going to stick with my number 6 brush apparently for this entire painting, which is okay by me. I'm just going to start off with the center of the rose, and I'm going to do 1 in real time, and I'll fast forward for the rest. Okay. So again, the squiggles, and then 3 C curves around the squiggles. Okay, and then I'm going to take some pigment off my brush and come in and do more C curves. And don't forget to overlap the starting points, okay? You don't want to start a petal where the one from the first round ended. It will just look kind of unbalanced and wonky. I can see my pencil line through there a little bit, but that's not the end of the world. And I don't want to make these huge roses. So I think that's good. A little too much pigment in the middle. Then I'm just going to take a little bit of that pigment, tap it on the inside edge of some of those petals. And if we have to go back and do some glazing to make it pop a little more, we will, but basically just a loose rose. Then I'm going to do another one over here and one roughly here. I'm just going to do the 3. So now I'm going to go in and do the yellow flowers, or like the yellow bud-like flowers. Okay, whoops, wrong yellow. I'll get this right one day. And I also want this kind of muted. Okay, so we're kind of hopefully mixing that same color, but I just want to do these pale. So I'm just going to take off some of the pigment off my brush. This pencil line looks a little heavy here. And I'm going to do a little sprig of those bud flowers. Again, these are the ones that we have to keep wet so we can have that stem bleed into it. I think I did those way too close. There we go. And another one. I may have done this one a little big. We're about to find out. And I'm going to go into the green. Okay, and we're just going to run the stem up the middle and have it bleed in. Just like that. And I'll do a couple more of these. Next, I'm going to go in with the purple flowers. So that is also using this same brush. Okay, so this is going to start off with just a light wash of the purple flowers. And these ones don't bleed into the stem, so we have a little bit more time. You can also just make some look like they're behind the rose. Okay, so you're not getting a full little bud there. So I'm going to continue on and do a few more, but then we're going to come back and glaze another layer of purple on top of those. Okay, so these aren't perfectly dry, but I'm going to go back in and do just some little kind of hits of another layer. I think I started here, so this would be the driest point, I think. Okay, so just doing this to just give it a little bit of shape and dimension. Okay, so now we're going to but now we're going to put in the little sprigs of leaves. Okay, so I'll mix more of the green. I'm going to need quite a bit. I really should be mixing with a bigger brush, and then that way it wouldn't be taking so long for me to paint, because I wouldn't have to be mixing these colors all the time. Okay, so now I'm going to fix the flatness up here with my first little branch of leaves. Hopefully I am. This is going to go on top of these yellow flowers. Okay, and I'm just going to join those. So we're just going to kind of balance things out. And I'm going to bring some of these leaves out from behind the roses, because that will also help the roses pop a little bit. Okay, just like that. Maybe out up here, I think we can get a little rounder as well. I'm going to put these behind those yellow flowers. So you can just kind of pop this in where you think it needs some greenery. Now we're going to pop in some berries, and they can overlap, but I'm going to make sure that some of them go underneath. That might be a little big. Underneath some of the lighter flowers, just so it looks a little more true, if you know what I mean. Okay, so some berries there. We're just going to pop these suckers in. Again, I'm going to vary the intensity of the value on the berries. These ones are a little easier to pop behind the other elements. But if you see where there's somewhere that you want a little more darkness or a little more contrast, you can go over the lighter flowers. And then now that all the elements are in, we can kind of just take a little step back and see if we want to throw in some leaves, which I think I do. So I'm going to go back to that leaf color and just start popping in some leaves. So I'm going to go in and just to make these yellow flowers come out a little bit, I'm just going to heavy up the stem just a little bit. Okay, not where it goes into the bleed, but just at the very stem part, the main stem. And then I think also to make them come out a little bit, I'm going to just do a little wash over some of the petals, just on the kind of, not petals, these are like the little buds, because the yellow dries so light and I didn't want to overdo it. So I'm just going to go back and just put a little bit of oomph on them. So I am going to go back into the roses and just do a little bit of glazing on those just so they pop a little more and have a little more presence in the wreath. Okay, so I'm just going to put, I've just added to the yellow a little more of the Payne's gray and a little more of that burnt sienna. So I'm just going to put it on the inner edges of some of the petals, just to give it a little more depth. Okay, then I'm going to rinse and dry off my brush and just blend it out a little bit, soften it up. Okay, just like that. They just kind of started to fade into the background a bit. And I'm also going to do the same to the yellow buds. Just give them a little more by just putting a few kind of lines on them. I don't want them very bright, but I do want them to just, like I say, have a little more presence than they do right now. And there you go. There is our Easter-inspired springtime wreath. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial and that you found it helpful. And I want to thank you again so much for joining me. That's it for today. Take care, and I'll see you next time.